Welcome to First Cup. This is the second part in a three-part little series we got going on around forecasting the impacts of technology on the workplace. Last time, you might remember, we went through some principles about how technology evolves and how to understand its impact. And today and next week, I want to talk about two kind of bigger mega trends within the tech world that will have what I believe is the most significant impact on workplace design and strategy. And this week, I want to talk about collaborative technologies. So, not new. Just like we said last week, these things evolve over many, many years, and collaborative technologies have been around forever. But what do we mean by that? What's collaboration? Collaboration is when one or more people work together to achieve a shared goal. So, in this case, we're not just talking about connecting people, we're talking about trying to help them do something together. And generally, collaborative technologies are software products. Again, if we reference our principles from last week, it's really more around software. I'm not talking about hardware solutions like Microsoft Surface Hub or Hayworth Bluescape. It's really not about the hardware. It's about software platforms that enable communication and the ability to develop content together. So this is a wide group of platforms. This would include Microsoft Teams, including Microsoft OS 365. It would include Slack, Google Suite, in particular Google Docs, and even some other more consumer-leaning platforms like WhatsApp. Again, to reference that point from last week that consumerization is having a big impact, WhatsApp is a good example of a platform that has been really changing how we think about collaboration. If you're not familiar with it, it's widely used outside of North America. It's actually a product that's now owned by Facebook. But it's how people in Europe and Latin America and parts of Asia connect with one another. In fact, if you go on the Herman Miller website in Australia, I think, or certain parts of Asia, you'll see there's even a contact us via WhatsApp kind of platform, and it's kind of connectivity, and it's a platform that is more focused on texting, providing a little bit of content, super easy to use. And when I try to get a hold of my colleagues in Latin America, as example, I usually hit them on WhatsApp before I'll hit them on Teams. So I already referenced a few different things from last week, that these are software that they've been developing for a long time, and that there's a consumer kind of vibe, particularly to Slack and WhatsApp and a few of the other products that have really been gaining momentum. I would include Zoom, by the way. I forgot to mention Zoom in that category. And the one principle from last week I didn't talk about was the need for behavioral change. And that is why I want to focus on this group, because we've had products like Zoom and Slack and Teams or its predecessors, Skype and Link and Communicator, for a long time. What's different is massive rates of adoption in 2020. We saw probably 5 to 10 years worth of adoption in about 6 months. And so I know all of us are living this, right? If you were not somebody who spent a lot of time on Teams or Zoom or Slack or the Google Suite before, you probably are now. And as I mentioned, they have a couple of features. They help us to communicate, they help us to share content, but they also operate in a couple different capacities, and maybe you've heard me reference this before. The first is synchronous collaboration. So this would be technology that enables us to work on something at the same time. Any video platform would be a form of synchronous collaboration, or in some cases, like with Teams, it's got a couple of different functions, but the video function itself is synchronous. And when we tend to talk about collaboration as it relates to workplace, we often go to this, it's a group of people doing something at the same time. But synchronous collaboration has its limitations, and many of you probably have felt this in the last year. It's very demanding. It requires us to be present at a certain time, regardless of what else we're doing, regardless of what else is going on in our lives, personally or professionally, and regardless of what time zone we're in. And so synchronous platforms have gained huge adoption this last year, like Zoom, but they've also, I think, it's better understood what their limitations really are. And if you look at teams of people that are more distributed and their use of software, collaboration products over time, it tends to move beyond the synchronous to the asynchronous, meaning the ability to interact with content or with communication when you have time. And it doesn't have to be when other people have time. So for me, Slack is my favorite one. I think Slack is a transformative product, but a lot of people haven't had experience with it. A better example might be the Google Suite, right? So like Google Docs, or even just using PowerPoint in Microsoft OS 365. So if we were to create some content together, chances are we would not sit down for hours and do it in a synchronous way. Somebody would write up a Word doc or a PowerPoint or a Google Doc and then send off a link, and somebody else goes and makes some edits and makes some comments. And yeah, eventually there will be a time where everybody reviews it together. But the vast majority of the work, that co-creative work in particular, is asynchronous. And if you look at most software platforms and how they enable interaction, this is the way they've moved. If you look at social media as an example, there were social media platforms that were more focused on synchronous interaction, including Twitter, by the way. Initially, Twitter was really about like, you jump on and you're in the midst of what they called at the time microblogging with all these other people. And eventually they realized, no, they added this what you missed section and they went more towards what Facebook and LinkedIn and Pinterest and other platforms had done, which is really enable asynchronous interaction over time. And then the goal there is to try to make sure that if somebody jumps on and they've got 20 minutes, that they're seeing the content that's most relevant to them. So I think that's what we'll see in the next few years, is that organizations that have adopted these platforms in droves are super reliant on the video features right now, and people are experiencing video fatigue and they're tired, and that as the workforce continues to get more distributed, it'll lean towards asynchronous interaction to balance it out. It's not all or nothing. It's both. And actually teams that get into really optimal flow will figure out how to use each one. Before taking this job, I led a digital innovation team where we had people spread out throughout the world, and a lot of our interaction was asynchronous. And then we used the video calls more to focus on high-touch moments. How are you doing? Tell us about your life. Tell us about what's working on this project, what's not working on this project. It wasn't necessarily just constant meetings to discuss things. We would do that using Slack, and then later when Herm Miller moved to Teams, we moved that over to Teams. And so I think that's what we're going to see. And just like we discussed before, this will be a years-long kind of process. But there are some big implications to workplace. So let's talk about those for a second. The first is we all need to get our heads around the idea that collaboration can take place across distance and across time. And the major behavioral changes of 2020 have amplified that, and it's not going back. I really don't think it is. It means that the conversations and the content need to continue to live in the cloud and on these platforms, even when there's a lot of people co-located in the facility. So what would be detrimental to a distributed team would be if everybody took the content out of whatever they're using now and threw it up on foam core on a wall inside of some room that a bunch of people can't have access to. And I just don't think that's the way it's going. I think that the digital transformation processes that led to this sort of adoption will continue. And that's good. And the space actually becomes just the place where you engage with that content using your tools. Now, I know it's very popular for people, not just throughout Herman Miller and our dealers, but everywhere, to say you need the workplace to collaborate. I don't think you'll ever hear me say that. I have not said that for a long, long time because I don't believe it's true. You do not need the workplace to collaborate. And I know that causes people some jitters, like, oh, we're feeling insecure about that. That doesn't mean that the workplace, in the office in particular, isn't of incredible value. It actually is of incredible value for a couple different reasons. Well, one is that we collaborate in communities. And so the community of collaborators is strengthened by the place. It's more about the community in some ways than it is the actual collaboration. You need ideally a group of people that know each other, trust each other, understand how each other works, to jump into those sort of collaborative interactions. But can you collaborate virtually with people you've never met? You can do it. Sure. I'm not sure it's always best. So I posted this on LinkedIn recently, but in my mind, I'm more excited about the workplace as a place to foster community among collaborators than a place where the collaboration has to take place. So maybe I'm splitting hairs there, but I think it's a useful sort of reference. The other thing, and we've talked about this within Future of the Office, is that there's some types of collaborative interactions, particularly the longer duration synchronous ones, so like a strategic planning session, that are terrible to do on video. And so in that case, can you do it? Yes, on video and remotely, but the workplace is just better for it. So I won't say that you have to be in the workplace to collaborate, but in some instances, the workplace is just a far better option than trying to do everything virtually. So for everything we said in Future of the Office, offices are still super important, but we do need to get our heads around the idea that collaboration takes place across time and distance, and that's a good thing. We don't want to reel back on that, or else we reel back on the ability for people to participate in it, and we don't want that. The second thing is the spaces that we're in do need to support how we're working. And some of this probably feels basic, but we do need to go back and make sure that meeting rooms and workshops can support video so that people that aren't there can be a part of those synchronous collaborative moments where there's a group in one place and they're in another. But there's other situations too, right? So I would expect that a lot of people will take video meetings individually in the office once they're back, because it's often a better experience to have your own little box on that video call than to be in a big room. And so we need to ask questions like, is there a place where someone can go and take a video call where there's good lighting and we're free of acoustical and visual distractions, where the camera can get up to eye level? Those sort of things. And the background behind the person isn't pure chaos, like peering into an open office. So I think the office and home office can do a much better job in supporting those synchronous interactions on video for individuals. And then you probably remember that we've placed quite a bit of focus on individual focus space in the office as well. That's partly to support asynchronous collaboration. People really working on that kind of stuff, whether it's content or whether it's just getting on the chat part of Teams and answering a bunch of stuff in a way that's free of distraction. So as far as the office goes, yes, definitely video-enabled conference rooms, but also those other places for individuals to work either when it's on video or asynchronously. The final thing I'll say is, and I know we've been hitting this drum for a long time, but it is very useful if you have the opportunity to try to build a bridge at your customers to the IT group. And IT and HR in general are getting more invested in workplace. And when I say workplace, I'm talking about home, work from home, I'm talking about office, and even beyond, places like FlexSpace, et cetera. It's IT's job to support people working wherever they are. And it's good for us to have conversations with them about the simple things that can be done in a space, whether it's a home office or in the office, to make sure that those interactions are better. And when you get the privileged chance to talk to somebody in IT, I think the most useful way to start that conversation is just to talk about the day-to-day headaches that people might have trying to use these tools in a given environment and how we can solve them. And most of the time, it's super basic stuff, right? Like, if it's a lounge chair, do they have a tablet arm to put the laptop on? If it's a conference room, is there a video camera that can see everybody in frame, or was the room designed so that half the people are out of frame? If it's an individual workstation, can they support video calls? Is there some sort of opaque background behind the person? Is there a height adjustable work surface to get that camera up? That kind of thing. So I know that you won't always feel like you have all the answers, but knowing how important that technology is to workplace, period, and knowing that collaboration tools are changing behaviors in such interesting ways, now is the time to just dig into it with your customers. You don't have to say that you've got all the answers. Just say that Herman Miller's got lots and lots of years of thinking about how to plan spaces to support the use of technology better, all the way back to 1968. And let's talk about what's happening at your organization and how the tools that people adopted in 2020 in droves will impact the workplace moving forward. So hopefully that's been enlightening to you. Next week, we get to dive into another tech topic that I absolutely love, prop tech or property tech, and specifically a subset of it known as CRE tech or corporate real estate tech. We'll get into that next week. But for now, thanks and have a great one.